28.3 billion, as you mentioned, and it was a year of big acquisitions all around. I mean, we recapped them on Healthcare IT News, but this is the year that saw Microsoft spending $20 billion to acquire Nuance.
Hi, Happy New Year, and welcome to our new season of HIMSS. I'm Kat Drusich, Senior Editor at Healthcare IT News, and your brand new host. Before we get started today, I wanted to do some quick housekeeping items. You may notice, for instance, that Jonah Comstock is not hosting this episode today. Jonah has taken an incredible new opportunity away from HIMSS and away from HIMSS Media, and we're very excited for him, but we'll also miss him, and we hope that we can make him proud. So over the next few months, you'll hear from me and other HIMSS Media editors as we discuss all the latest news in digital health and finance. So with that in mind, joining me today are Healthcare IT News Executive Editor Mike Milliard, Healthcare Finance News Executive Editor Susan Morse, and Moby Health News Executive Editor Laura Levitt. Thanks for being on with me today, team.
Sure.
Thank you for having us.
So I've gathered you all here today to discuss what was undoubtedly some of the biggest news, at least in the back half of 2021, Oracle's purchase of Cerner. As you noted in your reporting, Mike, the $28.3 billion Oracle paid for the giant is, quote, monumental. So it is up there with the largest software deals ever. Mike, for listeners who maybe were busy rocking around the Christmas tree or watching fireworks or, not looking at the news for the last half of 2021, lucky them, maybe you could just give us a quick recap about the deal and then maybe a little bit about what you've heard from industry analysts as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, stuff like this always seems to happen in the quiet, weeks of the end of the year and the holidays. But yeah, this is a big deal. 28.3 billion, as you mentioned, and it was a year of big acquisitions all around. I mean, we recapped them on Healthcare IT News, but this is the year that saw Microsoft spending $20 billion to acquire Nuance, and there was all kinds of big deals this year, but this one was the biggest. And another example of a legacy tech company, obviously, spending big to get into the healthcare space. Oracle, I think, has big interest in the cloud arena, and they see Cerner as a way of giving them a foothold there and helping them build out their cloud business. Yeah, I mean, Oracle obviously is a legendary company. It's been around since the 70s, and so has Cerner, actually. So it's going to be quite a meeting of mega companies, and there's going to be a lot to play out in the months and years ahead. We'll be covering it here at HITN, but certainly the analysts are interested in. I mean, this is not the kind of deal you see every day. But there's a lot to unpack here.
Mm-hmm. So Laura, I know that you did kind of a big wrap up about what this might mean for the greater industry. So could you tell our listeners a little bit about what you learned and what you're seeing in terms of going ahead into 2022?
Yeah, it's interesting because Oracle is such an enterprise, sort of has that enterprise feel where a lot of other big tech players are consumer first. So you have your Apple, Google, Amazon are getting into healthcare. And when you see Oracle getting in, yes, it is one of those big tech legacy players getting into the game, but it is a little bit different because it has an enterprise side. So and obviously Cerner is very much an enterprise software. So it sort of makes sense. In that way. And it's interesting because the other thing that we're looking at is Google Health sort of took a step back this year. They took away Google Health as it is, but Google from the above has said, healthcare is going to be sort of within every department. But David Feinberg, who was at Google Health, is now the CEO of Cerner. And so it's really interesting to see what he's taking from big tech in terms of those FANG companies and then applying to Cerner and what that's going to look like in Oracle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to see what happens, but a lot is going to depend on how much Oracle is willing to spend on R&D at Cerner for healthcare clients. Obviously, as Cerner is the EHR at the Defense Department and the one that has been chosen for the VA. Although, as you know, Kat, from your reporting, there's been quite a rocky road rolling that out at various VA sites. Obviously, I think it makes a lot of sense for Oracle, but for Cerner customers, I think it's gonna, the devil's gonna be in the details as we head forward.
Definitely. And speaking of Cerner customers, Sue, I know you've done some reporting about how providers are reacting to the news. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found there?
Well, for physicians, this is fantastic.
Hmm.
They finally get digital voice assistant. I mean, consumers have had Siri and Alexa for years, and finally physicians get this. There's been so much written about physicians and burnout and how much time they're spending in front of a computer to input patient information into the EHR. This is supposed to simplify that. So it's a great move in the direction. And, frankly, about time. The digital health seems to be the buzzword going into 2022 with much innovation in that space. Mike's already written about a lot of that, and Laura too. So I think this is a positive move for not just physicians, but for hospitals that don't want to see their doctors spending so much time in front of a computer.
And there's a big question in terms of Microsoft acquired Nuance, which does some of that similar things what you were talking about, Sue, where it's can be a voice assistant. So is Cerner going to be a competitor now to Nuance is a big question, because in the press release they made it pretty clear that was going to be a big component of this deal. So, looking at new competitors in that space, I think this definitely could be a Cerner Nuance, rather, some competition there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Nuance has a pretty dominant market share when it comes to voice, and they've been really innovating in that space for the past couple of years. And obviously Microsoft, saw that when they decided to spend $20 billion to acquire them. But one of the analysts I talked to, about the Oracle deal, they did make a big deal of this, voice digital assistant and what it will mean for provider customers. But, he said, quite frankly, when we talk about voice recognition technology, Oracle is not the first name that comes to mind. So we'll see, I think, going forward, what that means for Cerner and their customers.
It's interesting too, because at least from Moby, we see a lot of startups that are working in that voice assistant space. So what does it mean having another really big player get into that space too? Is that going to mean that, is there still going to be a place for startups? Is that going to just be in the M&A space? Or is there going to be new innovative things that, say, a company like Suki or Robin can do with that?
I'm also curious, you mentioned this a little bit, Mike, I think, but about the whole cloud migration factor. Cerner's in the middle of a migration with AWS. What do you think is going to happen there?
That's a good question. I think we need more than 3 weeks since the deal to
I guess that's true.
But it's I talked to John Moore from Chillmark Research, who says that I think clients are probably a lot taking a wait and see approach to what this means for them. He says it depends where I am in terms of a cloud environment, cloud migrations. If I was using Healthy Intent, which is their population health management platform, which is on AWS, his opinion is just leave it alone. Don't let us use our data. Don't mess with it. And I hope they'll probably take that approach. But as far as Millennium, their main EHR platform, I think that could be moving to Oracle sooner rather than later. I think there's just going to be a lot to play out as we look in the months ahead. And I know Bill Sawicki from Healthcare IT News is going to be talking to some of their clients and customers pretty soon. So check back with us on that. But yeah, it's a big deal, and there's going to be a lot of ripples as we go forward, I think.
I think it'll also help with automation. As front to back automation is how John Foley put it. When I spoke to him, he's with John is with a senior analyst with Acceleration Economy. And, he spent years in the business, and it's just going to accelerate all of the modernization that's needed for automation and bringing in machine learning and AI. So I of course, I'm looking at this as from a provider point of view, but I think it points everything in the right direction. And if there's competition, bring it on. Maybe, maybe that's what's needed.
I mean, speaking of competition, has anybody heard from Epic since this happened?
Yeah.
I really haven't seen much, but I haven't really gone looking.
No, but I think, and again, I spoke to an analyst who says that, well, first of all, I mean, it's really the end of an era if you think about it. I mean, Epic and Cerner were kind of, the Coke and Pepsi of EHRs for a long time, and both built up by their visionary founders, Neil Patterson, the late Neil Patterson from Cerner, and obviously Judy Faulkner from Epic, which is famously private and famously won't ever be acquired. I would venture to guess, even though Jim Cramer once said that Apple should buy Epic. It's going to be the end of an era in terms of competition of these self built companies, and Epic certainly seems to in a lot of ways be the last dominant player left in the space. Again, we'll see what sort of resources Oracle puts behind Cerner, and what its clients think as they move forward. But in a lot of ways, Epic seems to be in some ways be the quote unquote winner here in some spaces. And we may be seeing Cerner clients weighing their options perhaps, and looking forward to what alternatives might be, perhaps if they're dissatisfied with the way this goes. But at the very least, we know it's the end of an era as far as a competitive relationship in some big ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also, when you said that, Mike, I wondered whether we might see, this is maybe counterintuitive, but as far as the EHR platforms specifically are concerned, whether people might be looking more toward a more specific, tailored customer experience with maybe some of the smaller platforms that really don't have a lot of the maybe industry muscle, but might provide them exactly what they need, and are a little bit more nuanced, and that might, as Sue was saying, might help simplify things a little bit. Is that something anyone's hearing, or am I just kind of pulling that out of thin air?
I think perhaps for small practices maybe, but I think for large health systems, I think you're going to be sticking with some of the main legacy players.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, and I'm not sure, I'm sure, Mike, you've probably written more about this, Kat, you too, but about the overlapping of cloud technology and how that works, since Cerner is already a customer of AWS. So what does that mean? And, going forward, can the two overlap at all as far as data? I can't really speak to that, but it brings up interesting possibilities.
Yeah, I'm also interested too in the continuation of the ONC final rule, and whether Oracle is really prepared to pivot to this new year, which will involve a lot of getting more accustomed to those regulations and getting on board with interoperability.
I mean, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. I mean, obviously, the rule has been in effect, the first part of the rule has been in effect since this past April, but as a certified health IT developer, they kind of have to. So it's not really a question.
Yeah, I guess what, but it's just something I'm always interested in, because what I'm hearing, of course, in my reporting is that the practice of interoperability seems to be sort of lagging behind the promise in some ways. So that's something I want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's been the case for more than 10 years at this point.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think that's a valid concern. And again, healthcare is not a space that Oracle has had a presence here for a long time, but it's not a space that it's accustomed to. And we've seen a long history of major technology companies investing big in healthcare, including Google's and Apple's and Microsoft's, and finding diminished returns because it's a highly regulated space. It's a very complicated space. It's the companies like Epic that have been swimming in these waters since the 70s. They're a rare breed, and so I think it's a big learning curve. I think for some of these companies, even when they're spending billions of dollars to get into the space.
Yeah, Well, I know we only have a few minutes left here. Do each of you kind of want to weigh in and talk about maybe one thing that we perhaps haven't mentioned yet that you're personally keeping an eye on with regard to this move? And I mean, even just like looking forward into 2022, what are you watching in terms of Oracle Cerner or in terms of the broader space in general? Laura, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so kind of looking at in terms of like traditional tech companies that are getting into healthcare, I'm really curious about, there's a lot of promise there and what it's going to actually look like. And that goes for Oracle, but it goes for a lot of these other companies too. And, a lot of them, obviously, like the companies I was talking about before, Apple, Google, they have a long history in healthcare, but during the pandemic, everything was different too. And so what is it going to look like in maybe more normal times? I mean, maybe we'll continue the pandemic for a few more years, who knows? But what is that going to look like? And what barriers are they going to face in the future that maybe they didn't expect coming into something like a healthcare space?
Absolutely. Mike, how about you?
Well, one thing I haven't pointed out yet, which I think is interesting, is this marriage of Oracle and Cerner is not something that just dropped out of the sky. I was surprised to see when this was announced that this was first floated back in way back in 2008. More than 13 years ago, as a potential marriage of equals. With Oracle was on a bit of a buying spree at that point, and it's certainly been acquisitive over the years, with big, splash acquisitions like PeopleSoft, but this is still its biggest to date. But it does make sense, certainly for Oracle on paper. So it's going to be interesting to look as we head forward, how it deals with some of these challenges and how it deals with a very fast changing landscape in the healthcare space, and we are going to be paying attention to it.
Yep. And Sue, how about you?
Well, I think healthcare finance is looking for other partnerships to come up, because this ups the game. And of course, the bigger systems are already seeing everybody and their brother moving into the healthcare space, basically muscling in on their territory in a way by providing so much convenience that it means that I think there may be more partnerships among healthcare providers, healthcare companies, tech companies, to stay on top of it, to keep competitive with what's happening, because they need the expertise, they need the machine learning, they need the AI, all of that all the Googles, the Microsofts, and now Oracle and Cerner can provide.
Definitely. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today, and thank you to our listener as we move forward into this exciting new season with our brilliant HIMSS Media editors, and of course, experts and other guests as well. If you liked this episode, go ahead and rate us on iTunes or Spotify and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kat Jersich, and thank you all for joining me.